Our next speaker is going to be Hazel White, and Hazel is Director of Open Change, a service design and facilitation company based in Dundee, Scotland. The title of her talk is Collective Leadership, No More Heroes, and she'll be talking about how people in health services during the pandemic used the mindset and methods of service design to gather information. And she'll be sharing 3 stories on the power of design to connect across organizations. So take the stage, Hazel.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm just going to get set up, ready to share my slides. I'm disabled at the moment, so if you would let me share my slides, that would be fantastic. I don't know whether you might need to make me a co-host. Super. That's us. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm just going over to my slides. So, yeah, thanks for that wonderful introduction, Stina and David. My name's Hazel. I use she and he pronouns. I'm wearing a dark blue shirt and bright blue glasses, and I've got the SDN logo behind me. My team and I work with organisations in the public and third sector across Britain and beyond. And today, I'm taking a stand about leadership. This conference is about co-creating a better tomorrow. And I believe that that involves learning from the leadership that COVID unleashed from individuals working collectively on the front line of services. In this slide, I've scored out collective leadership and replaced it with everyday leadership. I'll come back to the term collective leadership later in the talk. But as I was talking to the people whose stories I'm going to share with you today, the term everyday seemed to sit better with them than collective leadership. Oops. Apologies, I've just got stuck on my slides. If you just give me a second. Okay, on screen is a sketch of a white man wearing a tie, gesticulating, and a speech bubble saying, "I can fix everything," whilst the diverse group of people look on, perhaps a little cynically, saying, "What's the right answer?" Better tomorrows require new approaches to leadership that are collective and inclusive. And I'll argue that old models of leadership centred on heroes simply don't work anymore. We require leadership models where people have the confidence and skills to shape our future world for the better. Again, I'm sticking my slides here. Just give me a moment and I will get them to move forward. Apologies for this. I'm just getting some tech support here. Great, super. I believe that the approaches that we use in service design, including user research, visualization, fast iteration cycles, the things that Gloria has just been talking about, and creative ways of sharing outputs, supports a different type of leadership where the voices and knowledge of those closest to the work can begin to lead change. And we also need to acknowledge that this needs to happen within systemic change. I'm going to begin by sharing 3 stories of everyday leadership from people I've worked with over the last 18 months. These stories are from healthcare, specifically from our free public health provider, the National Health Service in Scotland. I'm sure we could find very similar stories in healthcare right across the world. Indeed, we could find them in social care, in education, in business, every sector and every industry where people go to work equipped with passion, knowledge, experience, and an absolute commitment to do their best work every day. On screen is a photo of Zoe Spence, smiling cheerfully. Zoe is a nurse and a health improvement advisor based at Borders General Hospital in the south of Scotland. As the COVID pandemic began to take hold early last year, Zoe was one of the staff tasked with setting up the hospital's COVID wards. For Zoe and her colleagues, indeed for healthcare workers everywhere, that first wave of the pandemic was brutal. People trying to do their absolute best against a virus that was barely understood, often lacking even the basic equipment needed. Trying to manage colleagues as colleagues were brought down by COVID and the administrative and communication systems under pressure at the best of times were struggling to cope. Zoe and her colleagues got through that first wave, but what could be learned from that experience? What must never happen again? And what were the positives that that experience shared that might show how things could be done differently in the future? One thing they were certain of that would happen in the future was a second COVID wave. We worked with Zoe and a fantastic team from across NHS borders to gather and learn from the staff experiences of preparing for and entering the pandemic. A cross-organisational project team came together to figure out how to reach deep and broadly into NHS borders, from the laundry room to wards to community mental health, to hear from as many people as possible, including voices that were not often heard. We co-designed data gathering to be as accessible as possible, whether you were a nurse on a hospital ward with limited access to a computer, someone working from home, or a community health visitor who had to work from a new location with new technology. On screen is a drawing of some of the data collection methods we used, from questionnaires to interviews, posters and WhatsApp groups. Staff who were already trained up as coaches upskilled in user research to carry out the interviews. QR codes, which had become familiar through COVID test and trace services, were used to enable non-desk-based staff to easily give feedback via smartphones. Together with colleagues from managerial, clerical, clinical and workforce representatives, we collectively sorted the data to make sense of what we'd heard. Voices came in from right across the organisation, and these were themed and fed back into the system. Positive comments, people talked about pulling together as a team, the willingness of people to help even though they were struggling themselves. And on the flip side, how relationships were affected by moving people around and constantly changing shift patterns. There was widespread recognition of how team working and good leadership made the difference between a positive and a negative experience. And the insights were fed back in multiple ways. There were full reports, but also short, accessible ones, and animated videos which could be shared easily on WhatsApp and on social media. On screen is a screen grab of an animated video and a report being read on a mobile phone. We did 3 rounds of data gathering, and in the third, Zoe ran her own user research. The video on screen was specifically made with Zoe for her nursing staff on the COVID wards, so they could view them on mobile phones. Zoe recently used it to demonstrate to the senior management how frontline nursing staff needed earlier access to modelling data to enable them to better plan the setting up and dismantling of the temporary COVID wards. And what difference did this make? Collecting your voices has informed the development of staff wellbeing services, it's changed internal communication, it informed the deployment of staff, and will contribute to decision making and leadership development in the future. The Collecting Your Voices feedback loop is being maintained beyond the life of the project as a safe space for staff to share their voices back into the organisation in easily accessible ways. It enabled staff experiences and voices to be listened to and acted upon in extremely challenging circumstances. Existing hierarchies have been bypassed, enabling everyday leaders like Zoe and her team to make change happen. The themes of leadership, teamwork and communication have been strong throughout this work. Working towards a common goal and supporting one another has built resilience despite repeated shocks to both the staff and to the system. The organisation has become better at listening and acting upon those frontline voices, and better at empowering staff to make changes happen and tell them how it is. As the team says, we must listen and be prepared to make changes. We've all been changed by the experiences we've been through. Let's make them positive changes. On screen is a photo of Lara Mitchell, a senior doctor in medicine for the elderly. She's seated in her office at Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow. Lara took part in some brief service design training we delivered for an NHS fellowship programme a couple of years ago. Lara has a lot of experience of talking to people and their families at the end of life. However, COVID meant that many doctors without Lara's experience were suddenly deployed into roles where they were having to have conversations with patients and their families, often over iPads, about dying. And this is very, very demanding. Lara realised demanding times require radical steps. With no initial permission or authority, Lara asked us to work with her in making some materials to share quickly via social media. These were essentially palliative care 101 videos, but in the absence of anything else, they met a real need. We worked with Lara and a network of NHS colleagues across Scotland, sharing advice from experience as quick visuals and short videos. On screen is an excerpt from a resource we made to support staff caring for patients who were very ill with COVID and their families. It's a hand-drawn set of guidance notes for staff, a mixture of images and text. I've highlighted the things you might say section, which has phrases and speech bubbles such as, "It's important to be honest with you," and "What I'm saying is hard to hear." Feedback from staff was that these were easier to remember and had more humanity than bullet-pointed lists. Lara and her colleagues got Scotland's National Health Services education body behind the resources, who quickly got them out to the intended audience of healthcare professionals. We also worked with other colleagues making resources on mental health, gender-based violence, and supporting deteriorating patients. Some of these were translated into other languages. One became the most downloaded resource from the Scottish Social Services Council, and another became part of the Scottish Government's palliative care guidelines. And all designed through sharing frontline experience, specialist knowledge, and visualising in rapid cycles conducted often over WhatsApp and late night phone calls. On screen is a drawing of a doctor wearing a face shield with speech bubbles saying, "Treatments that may help and treatments that won't." This was from a resource discussing the effectiveness of resuscitation for a national health agency. The work happened very quickly. I'd sometimes find myself on a stand-up call with senior people from national organisations making quick changes to visualisations to reflect emerging policy so that the resources could get signed off by government and out within the week. I remember standing in my living room thinking, these people are asking me questions I don't actually know the answers to, but all we can do in this situation is the best we can. And there was an element of trust and of just getting things done that needed to be done fast. Lara could see the value of design and the power of visuals to bring humanity to really difficult messages that had to be communicated very quickly. She described it as changing words into images, softening harsh bullet-pointed lists into compassionate conversations. She had an absolute sense of the need to focus on these conversations, not just the numbers of people dying each day. So by radiating intent, rather than seeking permission as we produced the work, we were able to pass it through governance procedures exponentially faster than usual. And like Zoe, Lara's is a story of new models of leading change in a new world. On screen now is Ali Walker. Ali is a paediatric cardiac anaesthetist at Glasgow's Royal Children's Hospital. She's wearing full personal protective equipment, and on her apron, she's handwritten in large letters, Ali, sleepy doctor. As she says, I meet parents and children often on the worst day of their lives, and I want to make that experience as comfortable as possible for them. She has an absolute passion for changing the experience of the anaesthetic room that children are brought into to be prepared for often very serious operations. Before COVID, she was gathering support for an ambitious project to redesign the children's theatres across the hospital, using service design methods, working to gather the views of parents, patients, staff about the experience of coming into the hospital. Of course, things slowed down because of COVID. So she did a pilot prototype using the staff area that was used by people in the operating theatres. The image that you see on screen shows the staff area as it used to be, cramped with fridges and computers and office furniture. It's uncomfortable and it doesn't encourage either relaxation or socialisation. The new picture on screen shows the redesigned staff area. Staff are sitting in an area furnished like a cafe with plants and pictures. Ali co-designed the space with nurses, healthcare assistants, cleaners and doctors. By demonstrating how the redesign made staff feel more relaxed and restored in their breaks, Ali and her team gained buy-in from hospital management and has secured support and funding for the much larger anaesthetic room redesign project, which is just about to begin. Another case of radiating intent, another case of using design to get a job done, and in exercising everyday leadership, seeing an opportunity for change and reaching out across the organisation to make change happen. The tools, methods and mindset of design can help unleash this everyday leadership, building creative confidence and using design thinking to gain support to transform the services that people deliver. But to do this, we really need to rethink what we mean by leadership. We've inherited an industrial model of leadership that still exists within many organisations, where managers do the thinking and workers do the doing. This outdated model defines leadership in terms of hero leaders, exuding charisma, dynamism, and claims that they can fix all our problems from the top. We see that in politics, in public services, and in business. Too often, discussions on design leadership focus on buy-in from senior management to resource design. The holy grail of design leadership seems to be when it's represented at board level. There's a confusion between leadership and management, with managers passing decisions up the chain of command to avoid having to take them themselves. This leads to people feeling demotivated and feeling that change is just too hard to do. There's a sense of learned helplessness. And what's the alternative? Let's start by seeing leadership not as authority, but as a practice, one available to anyone with a passion to work with others to solve problems. This leadership doesn't come with titles and pay grades, but with a mindset and motivation to make things work better. The 3 stories I shared with you are examples of this mindset and motivation of everyday leadership. And what do they have in common? First of all 3 are acutely aware of their fast-changing context, the need to adapt and to work with others in taking appropriate actions to deal with new problems. Second, in doing this, they knew when to take risks, reaching out into their own organisations for allies. Finally, they were social experts. They could reach into their communities and bring people on board through mentoring, coaching and encouraging. Let me weave these insights together to define what I mean by everyday leadership and how we as a community can better support it. It's about autonomy, a sense of purpose and mastery. It involves bringing staff with expertise across an organisation together to feel trusted, to be able to work at the frontier of their competency, to make decisions, to help develop solutions which lead to their own personal growth and developing new skills, being able to contribute and being able to move in different directions within an organisation. It's about removing some of those things that are built up over time within organisations, the theatre of bureaucracy, as Aaron Dignan describes it. Service design helps us move and shift from controlling people and budgets to valuing people's strengths, their diversity, their multiple skills, their different perspectives, and by valuing their own motivations to make change happen. In Scotland, we have a government that supports a Scottish approach to service design, sharing practice across organisations, and also a collective leadership approach, which it characterises as curiosity, diverse perspectives, and understanding ecosystems and relationships. We understand these really well in service design. The real change happens in real work. Those who do the work make the change. We need to work across silos, breaking down barriers between service design, NHS practices, and collective leadership. So how does our service design community encourage and support this? We help by sharing and telling the stories of everyday leadership, what worked and what didn't. Our job as service designers is not to find solutions, but to be social facilitators who help those find solutions and build scaffolds for them to work with the communities that they serve. And finally, for us as a community, to reflect in fundamental terms on a question that we often avoid. George A. talks powerfully about design ethics. Let's use service design to empower those closest to the work to become everyday leaders. Finally, on screen is a tweet Lara Mitchell, the specialist in elderly medicine you met earlier, shared a few days ago. In it, she sums up the impact and value of design in healthcare. A mindset change, to think visually and not just in words, to understand what the problem is for others and not just roll out our own solutions, to stand in the shoes of others. Everyday leadership, no more heroes. As Lara says, let's use the tools of service design to give others a voice and to truly collaborate. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Hazel, for these really beautiful and clear slides. Thanks a lot, and see you in the Q&A.